Let's play it once more for good measure.
You're playing a song, but you do
Wrong.
it wrong.
You're playing it wrong.
You're playing it wrong.
That's Spinal Tap, explaining what jazz is. And it kicked off this video, in which I talk about the fact that for some people, jazz ranges from the incomprehensible to the abhorrent. To others, it's a soul-wrenching experience, whether that's as a listener or as a player. There were some great comments in response to that video. Brent pointed us to Yogi Berra when he was asked to explain jazz. I can't, but I will. 90% of all jazz is half improvisation. The other half is the part people play, while others are playing something they never played with anyone who played that part. So if you play the wrong part, it's right. If you play the right part, it might be right, if you play it wrong enough. But if you play it too right, it's wrong. For a more concise definition, we can turn to another source of sage wisdom, Homer Simpson.
Jazz. They just make it up as they go along. I could do that.
That clip was suggested by my friend Christos, who is the quintessential adult jazz student, a comeback player who's found that the study of jazz is a driving force in his retired life. In response to the question, what does jazz mean to you? Christos writes, jazz is passionate. It takes me on an emotional journey. It's intelligent and intellectual. It can also be a bit esoteric. I may not know what the soloist is doing, but if there's musical beauty or an aesthetic to it, then I'm engaged. I like the invention, the creativity. When I try to play jazz, the solo gives me the opportunity to put a bit more of myself in the performance, my own little flourish or addition to the piece. It's both creative and problem-solving, and it's thrilling. By the way, if you're new to this channel, my name is Chase Sanborn and I'm a jazz trumpet player based in Toronto. After a multi-decade career as a professional musician and also as a university professor, I find that I'm speaking most often these days to amateur musicians who are digging into the study of jazz later in life. As an example, this video inspired a lot of comments from adult jazz students. Sometimes, well, often, they express frustration, and we've talked about that on this channel. Others have made some sort of peace with their own limitations of time and ability, and they seem able to just enjoy the process without worrying too much about the end result. Somebody who refers to themselves as nobody of consequence writes the following. I'm constantly fighting the frustration of wishing that I'd started 50 years ago. I'd been practicing in a vacuum for a long time, thinking that I wasn't good enough to play with others. I finally took a leap and got together with some players, and I found out that I was right. I really sucked. But I was good enough to contribute something. It revealed weaknesses that I need to work on, and now I'm focusing on those areas with a practical application in view, and I'm starting to have some fun. In another comment, Mike writes, I'm in my early 60s, and I started playing about 10 years ago. My only real goal is to have fun playing and learning. Jacques Saul writes the following, and I'm sorry if I've butchered the pronunciation of your name. The wisest person that I know says I don't have goals. I want to be a better trumpet player and a better human being, and I work towards these things. But as far as having big goals, I'd rather have fun with my horn today. And finally, there's this one from Aaron. Late boomer here. I picked up guitar and piano at age 40 and learned that learning never stops. I'm glad to be here in this universe making music. There's a common theme in all these comments, and it was expressed in a clinic with Hal Galper from a few years ago. He's speaking with a hindsight of many years of professional experience, and it appears that he's addressing university music students. But I think that his comments are every bit as applicable to older students, and it speaks to the fact that those of us who have made this a career experience some of the same frustrations that you might be experiencing as an amateur.
You take the study of the music seriously, but playing is for one reason and one reason only. So I'm going to ask you a question. What was your first reason to start playing?
Because I had fun and enjoyed it.
Because he had fun. So, if you're worried about how you're playing, you're not having fun. Your goal has to be not perfection, not playing the perfect solo, but having fun. And you can't lose sight of that fact. And I'm telling you, you're going to be, over the years, seduced away from that, and you're going to have to remind yourself, wait a minute, I'm doing this because I want to have fun.
Going back to Homer Simpson for a minute, Homer is somewhat childlike in the way he views the world. It's not always in the best way, but hey, kids are not always the best people. Like a child, he assumes that if he wants to do something, he can do it. And when Homer says that jazz musicians just make it up as they go along, he's not wrong. It's kind of the intrinsic element of improvisation. Perhaps you could say the same thing about an author who conjures up a story from the depths of her imagination. Personally, I've never written a novel, but I'd imagine that at least in some cases, the writer doesn't know all the details of the story, or maybe even how it's going to end, until she gets into the writing process. She probably starts with a framework, just like we do in jazz when we decide on a tune. But you don't know, and you don't want to know, what you're going to play in advance. There's an element of discovery in jazz, for the musicians as well as for the listeners. Obviously, a good novel is more than a random assortment of words, and a good jazz solo is more than a random assortment of notes. Both begin with an understanding of the language. The art comes with how we use that language to express an idea, and on a deeper level, the ideas that we want to express. Jeremy speaks to that in his comment. Jazz is often overloaded with ideas that have been memorized or contain memorized information. It's obvious when a musician is actively composing, creating melodies and countermelodies, statements and replies, developing entirely new tracks of thought and feeling. Most of the jazz pedagogy on YouTube and elsewhere is about learning the language. And fair enough, because until you do that, you'll be stymied in your efforts to express yourself. The frustration that a lot of students feel is not being able to make the connection or bridge the gap between knowledge and creativity. You may understand on a theoretical level how a chord is constructed or how a scale relates to a chord, and I've delved into that in some recent videos. But how does that translate into a solo that sounds like something more than memorized ideas or applied patterns? How do you get beyond what you know or use that knowledge to express what you feel? This is not an easy question to answer, nor is it an easy thing to teach. As I've said before, learning to play jazz is a process of guided self-discovery. That guidance can come from a teacher, or it can come from simply listening to the musicians who are able to do what it is that you aspire to do. Bill Evans famously refused to show his brother some aspect of the music because he didn't want to deprive him of the satisfaction that comes from finding out something for yourself. A teacher can help you learn the nuts and bolts of the language, and you need that. And we can also point you in the direction of things that you need to discover. But in terms of finding the inspiration that'll make the way you play a reflection of who you are, that'll take some digging on your part. Regardless of your theoretical or your technical knowledge or ability, your primary job as a jazz musician is to communicate the joy that you feel when you listen to the music. And presumably you are one of those people. This is harder for adults than it is for kids. We're more self-aware and we're more likely to be self-critical. We have a clear idea of where we'd like to be, coupled with the awareness that we don't have as much time to get there. I've made the point before that a toddler can draw better pictures than I can. Not necessarily on a technical level, although given my lack of artistic ability, that is entirely possible, but because the child's art is free from self-doubt. It's a pure expression of how they're feeling or how they see the world. So how do we as adults get back to that childlike freedom beyond the constraints of self-doubt? To be able to just revel in the fun of what we're doing without worrying about how well we're doing it. I watched a jazz educator on YouTube recently, and I regret losing track of who it was. I watched so many videos on the topic. He described an exercise with his student ensemble in which he tells them to purposely play wrong.
You're playing a song
Wrong. You're playing it wrong.
To do all the things that they know they're not supposed to do. He said they loved it, and I imagine that they would, and that it actually sounded pretty good because they were freed of the fear of doing something wrong. Kenny Werner talks about that in his book, and others do as well, that the fear of playing something that sounds bad inhibits your chances of playing something that sounds good. Hey, just before I carry on, let me say that I don't have sponsors on this channel, and I don't sell memberships or courses. I do have a book on jazz improvisation, and if you like the information in these videos, I think you'll get your money's worth out of the book. Plus, book sales help support the channel. And if you want to get information that is specific to you and get feedback on your own playing, then you might want to consider booking a lesson with me on Zoom. You'll find that I'm pretty much the same person you see here, if maybe a little less scripted. Anyway, you can find out more about all of that at chasesanborn.com. Now, here's a question that I've posed to a number of students and colleagues. I think it originally came from Keith Jarrett. Would musicians be better off if recording had never been invented? On one level, the answer is always no, because we'd be robbed of hearing so much of the music that drives our passion to play it. But on the level of performance, would it be better if nothing we play could exist except in the moment, as was the case before Thomas Edison and Alexander Graham Bell came along? As a tool for personal growth, listening to recordings of ourselves can show us what we need to work on. But as a document of an ill-fated pursuit of perfection, well, that may only feed our own self-critical nature. Now, let me tell you, as a YouTube jazz educator, you have to get used to not only hearing yourself, but seeing yourself. And that can be a revelatory experience in the worst possible way. Of course, we do have the experience of music existing in the moment anytime we perform live. Afterwards, and absent a live recording, the music resides only in our minds and, we imagine, in the minds of the listeners. I think in the second case, it might be true if an artist is able to create something so impactful that it stays with the listener, even to the point that you could remember it for the rest of your life. I've experienced that, and I imagine many of you have as well. For most musicians, though, the reality is that nobody goes away thinking about our performance anywhere near the degree that we do or that we think they do. There might be a general impression of, I like this player, or I didn't really care for that player, but by and large, once the performance is over, possibly even while it's going on, they are not thinking much about us. It would be great if we could have the mindset of a child who shows you the picture they drew and then walks away without giving it a second thought, onto another picture, or blocks, or trucks, or whatever, as my grandson ably demonstrates. When Homer says,
I could do that.
he's thinking like a child. It seems like a good philosophy for life and jazz, but we do have to deal with that voice in the back of our heads telling us that we can't in fact do that, or that we can't do it well enough. We have to fight against that. Or maybe we just accept it and resolve to have fun anyway. Far more important to a listener than what we know or what we're able to do is how they feel when they listen to us. If we're having fun when we play, then they'll have fun when they listen. And that feels great, just like it does when you click the like button.